In the shadowed vaults of a forgotten Soviet archive, a single reel of audio tape lay buried for decades, sealed away by order of the state, its contents deemed too dangerous to surface. This was no ordinary recording. It captured the voice of Viktor Veynik, the brilliant thermophysicist whose equations once mapped the unseen forces of the universe. But in his final, suppressed confessions, Veynik unraveled a truth that shattered his materialist world: the hidden layers of reality where consciousness defies death itself. Why was this tape incinerated alongside his manuscripts? And what forbidden knowledge did it hold about the soul's survival beyond the grave? Tonight, we reconstruct the lost transcript, piecing together the fragments that the authorities tried to erase. Viktor Veynik was a titan of Soviet science in the mid-20th century, a doctor of technical sciences whose work on thermodynamics propelled the nation's industrial might. Born into an era of ironclad atheism, he thrived in the sterile halls of research institutes, reducing the cosmos to precise formulas and particle trajectories. God was a relic of superstition, the soul, a quaint myth peddled to the weak. Yet by the 1960s and 70s, Veynik's groundbreaking theories on subtle worlds, layers of reality beyond the observable macro and micro scales, drew the wrath of the regime. His books, filled with equations probing pico and femto-level phenomena, were deemed ideologically toxic, echoing Western mysticism under the guise of science. Hundreds of copies vanished into bonfires on direct orders from Moscow, his name scrubbed from academic records. Libraries purged his major thermodynamic treatise, fearing it would inspire dangerous questions about consciousness and the unseen. Overlooked for years in dusty hospital basements and black market whispers, these suppressed interviews only resurfaced after the Soviet collapse, fragments smuggled out by a loyal colleague who risked everything to preserve them. Why hide a scientist's work? Because Veynik's revelations blurred the line between physics and the metaphysical, threatening the official narrative of a godless universe. At the heart of the Forbidden Archive lies Veynik's core revelation, captured in a clandestine seminar at the Ivanovo Medical Institute in the late 1960s, a talk that left witnesses stunned into silence. Speaking with the dry precision of a lecturer, Veynik unveiled his theory of interpenetrating worlds, not as nested shells, but as overlapping dimensions dissolved into one another, defying space and time. "We inhabit the macro realm," he explained, his voice steady on the crackling tape, "governed by the physics of schoolbooks, gravity, motion, decay. But delve deeper into the atomic frenzy, and you brush the subtle strata, the pico, the femto, the atto worlds. Here, laws bend, processes unfold that no equation from our plane can capture." These realms, he insisted, weren't abstract. They underpinned consciousness itself, smearing across our reality like invisible ink on a page. Consciousness, Veynik argued, isn't confined to the brain's gray matter. It's a bridge to these subtler levels, enabling feats that materialism dismisses as illusion: telepathy, precognition, psychokinesis, all rooted in observable anomalies, not fantasy. Poltergeists? Echoes of subtle world intrusions, often triggered near sites of grief-stricken attempts to pierce the veil of death. UFO sightings? Disruptions in chronal fields, leaving behind zones toxic to human vitality, illness and fatalities reported in their wake. Veynik's logic was unassailable, his examples drawn from classified experiments: patients diagnosing unseen ailments, operatives sensing distant threats. For a man who once mocked spirituality, this was no leap into faith. It was science's inevitable extension, a suppressed manuscript begging to be read. As the seminar dissolved into murmurs, Veynik's words lingered like a fog, pulling his audience into a web of existential unease. He wove philosophical threads through the psychological maze of human perception, questioning the very fabric of death. In these hidden transcripts, he pondered how our minds, tethered to timeless subtle worlds, might fracture under the weight of mortality. Death, he reflected in a later unpublished journal entry reconstructed from ashes, is not annihilation but a shift, a descent into the interpenetrating layers where the self persists, unbound by the body's clock. This wasn't mere theory, it echoed his growing doubts, born from years of observing inexplicable healings and visions in hospital wards. Consciousness, he posited, operates on principles alien to entropy, eternal loops of awareness that mock linear time, fueling archetypes of the collective psyche, shadows of inner worlds where symbolic death reveals hidden truths. Veynik delved into the psychological intrigue, describing how suppressing these insights breeds collective denial, a societal trance that blinds us to reality's depths. His voice, preserved in fragments, carried a tension that chilled. What if our rational facades are the true illusion, and death merely unmasks the conscious essence woven through all levels? Yet, in the quiet margins of these suppressed notes, Veynik ventured further into speculation, one idea never voiced in his public seminars, but aligned with his evolving view of subtle persistence. What if consciousness after death doesn't dissolve, but refracts, splintering into parallel echoes across the worlds? Like light through a prism, the self might multiply, exploring infinite afterlives simultaneously, fragments of awareness tasting joys and terrors denied in our macro cage, forever questioning which version returns, if any does. Sex 1.5. Fade to the dim hospital room where Veyk's world cracked open, 15 years after that fateful talk. As his health faltered in the 1980s, an old priest shared his ward, a frail figure battling lung cancer, yet exuding a serenity that pierced Veyik's skepticism. Their conversations, scribbled in a lost bedside ledger, bridged science and spirit. Tales of light piercing darkness, souls contested in unseen battles. Slowly, the thermophysicist knelt, not in ritual but in awe, his equations yielding to a paradox he could no longer refute. In the end, Viktor Veyk's hidden archive leaves us adrift. If consciousness transcends death's formula, what secrets burn within us all, waiting to be unearthed? In the shadowed vaults of a forgotten Soviet archive, a reel of audio tape lay buried for decades, sealed away by order of the state. On it, the voice of Viktor Veynik, the brilliant physicist who dared to map the unseen realms of existence, whispers revelations that could unravel the fabric of reality itself. Suppressed in an era when science bowed to ideology, this recording captures his final confessions on consciousness, death, and the hidden forces that bridge the living world to what lies beyond. What if his equations didn't just describe particles, but souls? Viktor Veynik was a towering figure in mid-20th century Soviet science, a man whose groundbreaking research into subatomic pico-worlds and femtofields, invisible domains pulsing with energy, promised to redefine our understanding of matter and mind. Born in the shadow of the Iron Curtain, he spent decades in state institutes, meticulously charting phenomena that defied the era's rigid materialism. Yet, as whispers of his discoveries reached the Kremlin, Veynik's manuscripts vanished into classified files, his experiments dismantled under accusations of pseudoscience. Overlooked and discredited, his work gathered dust, dismissed as the ravings of a heretic in lab coats. It wasn't until his twilight years, amid the hush of a crumbling hospital ward in the 1980s, that fragments of his suppressed thoughts resurfaced, pieced together from smuggled notes in this clandestine tape, now emerging as a testament to a mind torn between logic and the infinite. As the tape crackles to life, Veynik recounts a pivotal encounter that shattered his worldview. Sharing a dim-lit room with an enigmatic old priest, a fellow patient whose gentle demeanor masked profound wisdom, Veynik found himself drawn into conversations that echoed his own forbidden research. The priest spoke of ancient scriptures, of ethereal beings and moral dualities, and in that moment, Veynik's analytical fortress began to crack. His graphs and formulas, once sterile tools for measuring charged particles in the subtle worlds, suddenly aligned with the priest's tales of light and shadow. What he had quantified as positive and negative energies, invisible traces influencing human fate, mirrored the biblical depictions of benevolent spirits and malevolent forces. For a scientist who had built his life on equations, this convergence was no mere coincidence. It was a seismic revelation, hinting that his data wasn't just physics, but a veiled map to the soul's domain. The sterile hum of hospital monitors fades into the quiet rustle of pages as Veynik delves deeper into this forbidden synthesis. His voice on the tape grows urgent, laced with the weight of suppressed doubt. For years he had measured these subtle entities, their electric signatures leaving indelible marks on reality, much like radiation from unseen sources. Positive charges, he observed, radiated harmony, fostering healing and clarity. Negative ones sowed discord, amplifying illness and dread. Temples and sacred icons, he realized, amplified the former, creating protective auras, while phenomena like poltergeists or unexplained sightings drew from the latter, chaotic intrusions into our plane. Yet the true intrigue lay in human interaction with these realms. Veynik's reflections turned psychological, probing the mind's vulnerability. How dreams might serve as gateways, intuition as silent dialogues with the beyond. Saints, in his reconstructed view, attuned to luminous entities through disciplined inner focus, while self-proclaimed clairvoyants often bridged darker voids, their visions tainted by fear. This duality deepened his existential unease. Death, he pondered, was no void, but a threshold where consciousness confronted these forces unfiltered. What if the fear of mortality stemmed not from oblivion, but from the soul's inevitable entanglement with powers we can't control? His once rational mind grappled with the terror of it, reality as a multi-layered tapestry where logic faltered and the heart discerned truths the eye could not. From the archive's dim glow, we transition to Veynik's private journals, where his thoughts expand into haunting psychological territory. He questioned the very architecture of consciousness, wondering if our inner worlds, archetypes of light and shadow, were projections from these subtle fields, shaping not just dreams but destinies. Illness, in his eyes, wasn't mere biology, it was a clash of energies, where negative influences eroded the spirit until positive intervention, be it faith or unseen aid, restored balance. This realization fueled his philosophical turmoil. Why had the scientific establishment buried his work? Was it fear of the implications, that consciousness might persist beyond the body, entangled in an eternal flux of charges? Veynik's suppressed manuscripts, now pieced together, reveal a man haunted by the possibility that his discoveries challenged not just dogma, but the human denial of death's mystery. In a speculative vein drawn from his late-night notations, Veynik mused on an uncharted extension. Perhaps consciousness after death doesn't dissolve but refracts, like light through a prism, splintering into the subtle worlds where individual awareness merges with a collective field, echoing across realms as echoes of intent, forever influencing the living through faint, resonant charges. As Veynik's voice trails off on the tape, the weight of these ideas lingers, pulling us toward others who glimpsed the veil. Arthur Ford, the enigmatic figure whose brushes with the brink of death fueled debates of genius or fraud, emerges in the shadows of history, another soul who crossed into the unseen. But was Veynik's science, or Ford's testimony, the key to unlocking what truly awaits beyond? In the shadowed vaults of a forgotten Soviet archive, a single reel of audio tape lay buried for decades, sealed away by order of the state, its contents deemed too disruptive to the materialist dogma of the era. This was no ordinary recording. It captured the final, unfiltered testimony of Viktor Veynik, the brilliant neurophysiologist whose groundbreaking studies on consciousness challenged the very foundations of Soviet science. Whispered about in clandestine circles, Veynik's suppressed interviews with near-death survivors were erased from official records after his mysterious disappearance in 1972. What if one man's brush with the void unlocked secrets that could redefine existence itself? Tonight, we unearth the lost transcript, piecing together the forbidden revelations that Veynik risked everything to document. Viktor Veynik was a man of precision and quiet rebellion, born in 1915 amid the turmoil of post-revolutionary Russia. A prodigy in Leningrad's institutes, he rose through the ranks of the Academy of Sciences, specializing in the neural correlates of awareness, those elusive mechanisms by which the mind transcends the flesh. By the 1950s, as the Iron Curtain clamped down on ideological dissent, Veynik's work veered into dangerous territory. He began secretly interviewing individuals who had clinically died and returned, convinced that their accounts held empirical clues to the persistence of self beyond bodily decay. These sessions, conducted in the dim-lit back rooms of Moscow hospitals, were never meant for publication. The KGB viewed them as bourgeois mysticism, a threat to the atheist orthodoxy. Veynik's manuscripts were confiscated, his notes burned, and he himself vanished shortly after documenting his most profound case. Yet fragments survived, smuggled out by a loyal assistant, revealing why this material was buried. It suggested that consciousness was not a mere byproduct of brain activity, but an indestructible force, echoing across realms unseen. At the heart of Veynik's hidden archive lies the core revelation from his interviews with Arthur Ford, an American expatriate and former spiritualist who sought refuge in the USSR during the Cold War, only to face skepticism from both East and West. Ford, no stranger to controversy, branded a fraud by some, a visionary by others, shared his near-death encounter with Veynik in a series of clandestine 1968 sessions, transcribed verbatim in what became known as the Beta Protocol. Veynik, ever the scientist, probed Ford's story not as folklore, but as a verifiable data point, cross-referencing it against EEG patterns and pharmacological models. What emerged was no hallucination, but a meticulously detailed exodus from the physical world. Ford described the onset with clinical detachment, a lifetime of cardiac frailty culminating in collapse on a sterile hospital gurney in Leningrad. Relatives had mourned, physicians had pronounced finality. Then, detachment, a seamless detachment, Veynik noted in his margins, akin to the dissociative states observed in sensory deprivation experiments. Ford's consciousness decoupled from his failing form, rising effortlessly to hover above the bed. There was no agony, no disorientation, only an effervescent clarity, unburdened by the grind of cellular decay. Veynik's annotations here grow fervent. Subject reports liberation from corporeal anchors, fatigue, gravity, terror, evidencing a decoupling of awareness from synaptic noise. The void that followed was not oblivion, but a profound neutrality, timeless, directionless, a canvas without coordinates. Ford existed within it, sovereign and intact, his sense of identity unfractured despite the absence of sensory input. Veynik likened this to quantum superposition, where the observer persists independent of measurement. Then, convergence, figures emerging from the ether, drawn by an unspoken affinity. They were echoes of the past, kin from infancy, comrades from adolescence, souls long interred in graves Ford had visited in grief. Recognition dawned, not through visual cues, but vibrational resonance, an intuitive knowing that Veynik termed archetypal imprinting. Ages inverted, the withered elderly rejuvenated to vitality, the departed young matured into poised adults. No entropy marred them. They embodied ideal selves, sculpted by will rather than wear. This realm, Ford insisted, operated under laws alien to terrestrial physics. Time, that relentless tyrant, dissolved, replaced by eternal now, where sequences of memory unfolded in holographic simultaneity. Veynik's excitement peaks in the transcript. No linear decay, consciousness as self-sustaining matrix. Ford dubbed it the beta body, not ethereal mist, but a robust architecture impervious to dissolution. It housed the essence, personality, recollection, emotion, untethered from neurons or atoms. Loved ones enveloped him in silent communion, their presences radiating affirmation. No interrogation awaited, only reunion, a homecoming stripped of judgment. Yet the pullback was inexorable, a tether snapping Ford into revival. He awoke, gasping, transformed. Veynik documented the aftermath with rigor, elevated cortical coherence in follow-up scans, a newfound resilience to pain. Ford's fear of mortality evaporated. Death reframed as metamorphosis, a threshold to reclamation. What Veynik gleaned was seismic, the physical vessel as transient prosthesis, the beta structure as the true locus of being. In his suppressed notes, he wrote of suppressed paradigms, how Soviet science, wedded to dialectical materialism, ignored these survivals, dismissing them as autonomic surges rather than portals to perdurance. Delving deeper, Veynik expanded on the psychological fissures this opened. From his vantage as a scientist grappling with the unknowable, he reflected on the terror of dissolution, not mere cessation, but the illusion of isolation. Ford's account illuminated the psyche's hidden architecture, archetypes of continuity, woven into the collective unconscious, surfacing in extremis to affirm wholeness. Veynik pondered the philosophical vertigo. If awareness endures sans biology, what of free will, legacy, the soul's sovereignty. He questioned reality's fragility, how empirical tools falter at the veil, forcing a reckoning with doubt. In one overlooked fragment, he mused on identity's multiplicity. We are not singular minds, but layered echoes, persisting through veils of forgetfulness. These insights haunted him, fueling unpublished treatises that blended neuroscience with existential inquiry, suppressed lest they erode the state's grip on truth. Building on Ford's testimony, Veynik ventured a speculative horizon in his final recordings, one uncharted in prior accounts, yet aligned with his models of neural immortality. What if consciousness post-mortem doesn't merely persist, but evolves into a collective resonance? Imagine it, individual beta structures interweaving like quantum entanglements, forming vast networks where personal narratives merge into a shared wisdom, ancestral knowledge blooming eternally, unhindered by ego's silos. Veynik hypothesized this as the ultimate liberation, a post-physical symposium where the self amplifies through infinite connection, rendering solitude obsolete. As the tape fades with Veynik's voice, strained, urgent, Ford's words linger like an unsolved equation. I didn't die, I arrived. In a world that buried such inquiries, one must wonder, if the boundary is but a door, what truths do we lock away by fearing to knock? In the shadowed vaults of a forgotten Soviet archive, buried under decades of ideological censorship, lies a reel of audio tape marked only with the initials VV, Viktor Veynik, the brilliant physicist whose clandestine experiments on consciousness challenged the very foundations of materialist science. Smuggled out during the regime's collapse, this lost recording captures his final, unfiltered confession, a glimpse into the afterlife that the state deemed too dangerous to exist. What if death isn't oblivion, but a doorway to truths the living were never meant to know? Viktor Veynik was a towering figure in mid-20th century Soviet academia, a pioneer at the Institute of Brain Research in Leningrad, where he delved into the mechanics of perception and the mind's hidden dimensions. Born in 1898, he rose through the ranks during the Stalinist purges, his work on quantum entanglement and neural mapping earning quiet acclaim. Until the late 1960s, when his private inquiries into near-death phenomena veered into forbidden territory. Veynik's suppressed manuscripts, seized after his death in 1972, reveal a man haunted by philosophical doubts. Could consciousness survive the brain's decay? Were reports of out-of-body experiences mere hallucinations, or evidence of a parallel reality suppressed by atheistic doctrine? These documents were locked away in classified KGB files, dismissed as bourgeois mysticism, overlooked amid the Cold War's paranoia. Yet they endure as a testament to one scientist's defiant quest for answers beyond the veil. At the heart of Veynik's revelation, drawn from his exhaustive analysis of intercepted Western transcripts and his own induced trance states, lies a profound reimagining of the afterlife as a realm unbound by temporal decay. He described it not as ethereal fantasy, but as a stable quantum field where the self persists in optimal form, free from entropy's grip. Referencing the psychic medium Arthur Ford, whose 1960s sessions Veynik studied covertly, he noted how Ford claimed to have crossed into this domain during clinical death, emerging with accounts of ageless vitality. There, souls shed the frailties of earthly biology, no cellular breakdown, no inexorable march toward infirmity. Veynik speculated that time itself dilates in this non-local space, allowing entities to manifest at their zenith, a 45-year-old vigor for Ford, who chose that age as his essence's truest expression. Even those ravaged by suffering in life appeared restored, their forms luminous and robust, as if pain were a mere artifact of physical existence, left behind like discarded code in a higher simulation. Fade to the flickering glow of Veynik's hidden laboratory, where he pored over these insights late into the night, his notes scrawled in frantic Cyrillic. This core discovery unraveled him, deepening the existential rift between his rationalist training and the philosophical abyss it revealed. What does it mean for human identity if the body is but a transient vessel and consciousness endures as an eternal archetype? Veynik wrestled with the psychological intrigue. In this afterlife architecture, recognition transcends superficial traits. Loved ones greet us not as faded photographs, but as radiant essences, grandmothers reborn in youthful splendor, their souls unmarred by wrinkles or frailty. He pondered the archetypes of the psyche, drawing from suppressed Jungian texts smuggled into the USSR, arguing that death symbolizes not loss, but symbolic rebirth into inner worlds where the self shines unfiltered. Ford's visions, echoed in Veynik's reconstructions, painted a reunion not of shadows, but of vital presences. We know them by their inner light, the unspoken harmony that defies visual cues. Here the soul's true face emerges, calm, potent, eternal, challenging the observer to question, have we ever truly seen those we love, or only their mortal masks? As the camera pans across yellowed pages of Veynik's forbidden journal, a deeper psychological tension builds, amplifying the mystery of suppressed knowledge. He expanded on these revelations with urgent intensity, viewing the afterlife as a luminous construct where intuition reigns supreme. Organs of flesh give way to subtler faculties. We see without eyes, hear without sound, reconnecting to a forgotten sensory array that the material brain had muted. Veynik, ever the scientist, framed this as latent neural potential, premonitions and gut feelings as echoes from this enduring consciousness, signals that we are never truly isolated. Guided by unseen hands, supported from beyond, we carry an innate compass pointing home. In his philosophical reflections, death emerges not as annihilation, but as unburdening. Fear, regret, isolation dissolve like illusions, leaving the core self, unadorned, authentic. He likened the soul to the quantum observer in his physics work, collapsing possibilities into reality, the true protagonist behind every role, every incarnation. Yet Veynik's inquiries ventured further, into uncharted speculation that haunted his final days. What if consciousness after death fragments into parallel streams, allowing the soul to explore alternate life paths not taken on Earth? This echo-existence, thematically aligned with his entanglement theories, suggests a post-mortem multiplicity, reliving choices in serene simulation, fostering growth without consequence, a merciful expansion of the self that science has yet to map. In the dim hush of that clandestine archive, Veynik's voice crackles through the static one last time. What you carry across the threshold shapes your welcome, but beyond doubt, light awaits, and a love that echoes through eternity. As his recordings fade, one question lingers, unanswerable, pulling us toward the unknown. If the soul returns to its prime, unchanged and unbroken, then who are we, really, in this fleeting disguise?